we don't realize how hard it is to pull together players from across the country, have a week or less of practice, and then try to create the cohesiveness that can allow a win to happen or allow the team to gel. And Jordan's doing a great job with that.
In fact, I'm not going to attribute any of this to you, but in an article being written, it says that we have been able to take it up a notch for the stars of the future, our players. We can showcase their talents not just for one organization at a time, but for all of professional baseball. You can be sure that big league scouts will be in abundance every time we take the field. Our Secrets of Champions program, which has decades-long history at the highest level of professional baseball, is a big part of what we offer these guys as we recruit them. We're applying big league principles and practices that both give them a familiarity with what awaits at the next level, and most importantly, provides them an all-important edge as they go forward. Do you get a sense when Jordan or anybody was reaching out to the coaches that the Secrets of Champions additive was something which became a value added to the decision of coaches to send us here?
Right. I think it did, and Jordan, of course, he's been with us since he was with the Tigers in 2011, so he knows Secrets of Champions in and out, and it is an edge, and I think that there are people who know about Secrets of Champions, and I think it helped with recruiting, and then just describing what's involved. For example, the timing of nutrition for these guys, which is something that we developed with the Tigers. It's huge so that these guys have enough ready energy to perform day in and day out. At the college level, you don't play every day. It's just basically it's a weekend thing. So, just being able to have something that can allow them to be prepared energy-wise is huge. And when Jordan explains that to guys, they're like, wow, is this what they do upstairs? Is this what they do at the big leagues? And some teams do. And of course, maybe there are some different variations on it, but in general, ready energy and performance preparedness is huge. And I think that helped them. It helps with the recruiting, but it puts the players in the best position to succeed. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think helps a lot is the fact that we have a history. We've been, I was, 17 years in the big leagues. Jordan spent some time there. We brought in people like John Matlack and Brian Peterson and those guys. Yeah. And it doesn't take much of a conversation. For example, with pitchers, who have we dealt with? The obvious ones over the years: Justin Verlander, Rick Porcello, Max Scherzer, 3 Cy Young Award winners right there. So we've been with those guys. And I think in the recruiting of players, have them come to Jamestown, that alone for pitchers is huge. It's almost like most guys out there in the hinterlands. The first question, when I go out and speak in universities or college teams or whatever, have you ever really talked to Justin Verlander? Have you talked to Rick Porcello? So it's only at their level, it's just the familiarity matters. But to actually work with these guys and to be able to say, look, some of the things that they do, you can do. We can teach you how to do this stuff. I think that's huge.
In recruiting players, we had through video introduction yesterday, went through the lineup and they introduced themselves, where they're from and what their position is. How do we actually ascertain who's out there? I mean, how do we recruit?
Well, there's a whole network of coaches that Jordan is now wired into well. So coaches will give you the first tip. I got a left-hander here who throws 95. That kind of thing. And of course, nowadays with YouTube and all of that, every player has their own highlight video. Their parents make it, their coaches make it, or whatever. So those things circulate. Some of them you have to take with a grain of salt. But there are ways of looking at them, in the field, the coaches in the college ranks are able to give us some insight into character, really important. And a lot of it then is, talking through it, and then, of course, talking to the player. And Jordan's great talking to players. He's young enough to be, in their sort of age range, but experienced enough for them to look up to him. And he just has it. Some people have it. He has it.
Right. So you get 30 people here. Have you met with them? Have you spent time, or what do they get in advance? Do they get a Secrets of Champions booklet? Do they get a sort of a manual? What is it that?
Well, what we're going to, and this has been weird because of, we didn't have the season last year. So what we've decided is that next week before our first home game is going to be the first time we all get together and do Secrets of Champions. But little by little, Jordan has passed on to them the nutrition things, some of the other workout regimens. Jordan and I had a talk this morning about the shoulder programs for the guys who pitched last night. It's one thing to go out and play, but we have to get repair and recovery on the road so they're ready in a couple of days to go again. So they're very sophisticated shoulder stretching and those types of things that are done post an appearance. And so we have some Secrets of Champions things that Jordan has offered to them, but keeping in mind that these players all come from programs where they have their own approach. So what we'll end up doing is within the next couple of weeks, we'll take the best of the best and we'll create the program that we want these guys to follow, and they appreciate that we're taking input from them as well. Now the few guys who I have met, wonderful young men. I think we're going to be good, and I think we're going to give these guys something that they can take with them back to their programs.
It is part and parcel of not only the physical Secrets of Champions, but kind of how to interact with media. I mean, one of the things that I knew my daughter, who was intimately involved in sort of national ice skating, they had a regular specific program because people who are in somewhat of the limelight have to deal with the media to learn how to communicate. Is that part of your?
That's part of it, and it's actually a bigger part than you might think, especially today where these guys have their own social media feeds, their Twitter feeds, Facebook. They have all of that stuff, and the thing that we teach these guys, and it's not just for public relations reasons, is that we and us should be their main terms as opposed to I and me. So that when we talk about we mean the collective we, and when a player talks about we, his teammates are hearing we. And that serves to coalesce the team around each other. But it also is important for the media to keep understanding that we are a team. This is a group. It's not only the guys on the field, but it's the staff, it's the manager, it's the coaches, it's the ownership. It's everyone involved with the organization that is part of the process. So the we is where it's at.
Was baseball an interest that was natural to you? Is this something your dad encouraged you to get involved in?
Well, it was, it's interesting because we've talked about this. My Uncle Pete, Carlo, was an usher at the ballpark. What was it called back then? It wasn't
College Stadium.
College Stadium. That's right. He was an usher, and he was a sports nut, and so he was the one who took me around to, various football games, basketball games, the whole bit, and so there was an opportunity in 1965 where they had identified somebody to be a bat boy, and then the guy moved out of town, so. My Uncle Pete said, well, my nephew George can be a bat boy. So I was given the job, and I remember just like yesterday when I showed up. There wasn't a uniform that was small enough for a 12-year-old kid, so they made do, and of course you go get the bat, you bring the balls to the umpire, you can stay out of the way. Basically, those were the instructions. And we had a center fielder at the time. His name was Willie Redmond, and he was awesome because he modeled himself after Willie Mays. So he made basket catches, which were highly unusual. And so I was, my first game there, this fellow comes and puts his arm around me, and he said, "Look, you're new, and I'm new." He said, "Anything you need, let me know, and I may ask you for some things as well." Now, I'm a 12-year-old kid looking up to this professional baseball player, and I went from there. He became one of my heroes, and actually the next year, in spring training, he hit a grand slam. And I remember seeing it in the paper here, and I was very excited. So anyway, we also had, Jim Leland was on that team, and he was a catcher, and I used to spend a little bit of extra time with the catchers because they did bullpens and all of that kind of thing. So that was pretty cool. We had Jim Rooker was involved at the time, and we also had a third baseman named Larry Haggett, I remember, and a few others. So anyway, that was the beginning, and of course, at that time,
did you learn some language?
They were pretty good around me, but I learned some language. Yeah,
When you were 13.
Yeah. No, that was a lot of fun, and I know there's a picture floating around with this, and that was sort of the beginning. And I have to tell you, every time I go into the ballpark, I think about I go over by that dugout. Of course, we played high school ball there or whatever, but used to sit right on that little concrete slab. That was the Bat Boys' home. And,
was Jerry Klein part of that world then?
I believe he was the owner at the time.
Well, Jerry was the general guy, the driver. He was the bus driver.
Okay, no, it wasn't him then.
He may not have been around at the time, but I don't know.
I never went on away games.
Yeah.
They had. I'm trying to think of who it was. I think it was Manny Sanguian, I think, and he was with Batavia, I think. And one of the things that happened was that somebody got into a little bit of an argument with Manny. So then they came back and the guys were saying, don't mess with that guy because he used to be a boxer. So that was one of the things, and I'm like, whoa, a real boxer? Oh yeah. So.
Did you have much of a crowd then in those days?
It looked like a big crowd to me. But I think the games were very well attended, and I remember they used to, my uncle used to, take the tickets and then go in and clean off the seats, so people would have a clean seat to sit on, and for a young kid, just that whole process was really cool.
Did you play ball? Did you play Babe Ruth baseball? Was that something part of your world?
Oh yeah. I played interestingly, I played in what we used to call the minor leagues here, and then that year that I was the bat boy, I didn't play because I was the bat boy, and then the next year I played for Mount Moriah Little League team. And then I played, of course, in Babe Ruth, and I ended up playing in high school, and played throughout. I was a catcher, and it was good. I still have sore knees that follow you for life. No, it was good. It was fun, and I thought that baseball was one of those things. Going through high school, of course, I played football as well, but baseball was where the you had time to talk to guys and, made some lasting friendships.
Who was your hero? When you were growing up as a baseball player, often there was a time where everybody wanted number 7, Mickey Mantle.
Oh yeah, that was my guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. Mantle was my guy, and we used to have. I don't remember what radio station. Probably JTN used to carry the Yankees games, and I had this little transistor radio. By the way, the transistor radio that I listened to, I won in a raffle at the stadium, and it was one of those. It was about this big, and it had a little holder on the back so you could put it on the table, and I used to put it outside and listen to the game while my brother and I were playing catch.
Yeah. So Yankees is your team, but during that 60s, one of the other major names was a guy named Al Kaline, and later on in life at some point you put on a Tigers uniform and you meet him. What was your sense?
Oh, it was amazing because Al Kaline, of course, was a contemporary of our guys, of Mantle and Maris, and I can give you the lineup of the '62 Yankees: Bobby Richardson, Tony Kubek. Third was Maris. Fourth, and anyway, fourth was Mickey. Sometimes Elson Howard hit fifth. Otherwise, other times it was Clete Boyer. But anyway,
You're showing off.
I'm just showing off here. But it made an imprint. But when I first met Al. It was in a meeting, and I had been with the Tigers for a couple of years before I actually, got a chance to meet him, and it was interesting because we sort of sat down in a conference room, and he said, "Now, what is it that you do?" And I was, well, it's the science of performance. And he was very polite, and he said, okay, you're going to have to work with me a little bit to understand a little more. So he and I started to we would chat at least once a week through the season, and he was really good, and he always had some ideas that related back to him. He'd say, I remember this son of a gun was a real horse's ass until something like this happened, So he was great, and what a human being, just absolutely amazing. And of course there were others, in the time with the Tigers, Willie Horton, what a person, and Lance Parrish and Tom Brookins and all of those guys. It was. What an honor to be able to work alongside those guys and have them feel that we might have something to offer. Yeah. That was cool.
Well, just for the camera, it's George Carlo who put the encouragement, the bug in my ear to invite to Jamestown Willie Horton. And I said, I don't think that's going to really be reality, but if you think it's worth it, you made a call. Then I followed up with a call directly to him. Got a phone. Next thing you know, we got a guy to drive him from Detroit here in a Cadillac, and the rest is history. Where Willie Horton spent a couple days here, but it would not have happened but for George Carlo. That's the respect he had for you. So the rest is one of the highlights of our Tiger talented events that we had over years. You working with players, though, in one sense, you're a doctor, Dr. George Carlo, and so is there a skepticism of players? These are professionals, especially, who sort of motivated themselves to get to the positions where they are, and then there is somebody who parachutes in and says, "I think I'd like to help you."
That's an interesting point, because in the first few years, there was quite a bit of skepticism, but it was one of those things that was overcome when you had somebody like Justin Verlander say, I did the evaluation that Dr. Carlo has. It's worth doing. Same thing when Rick Porcello came. He was 17 years old, out of high school, jump right into it. But the key has always been to keep what we find confidential. You know, Brian Peterson and I worked together in all those years, and we used to say that, you know, the players, you guys are the driver of the race car. Sometimes we need to look under the hood, see if we can tune some things up. So most of what we did in the performance arena, performance enhancement arena, was in the context of fine-tuning. And it was confidential. So we would never talk to another player about what we were doing with another player, for example. And that was really important. We keep those things confidential to today. You know, so even though, you know, I've spent time, I spent time working with Miguel Cabrera and Brandon Inge and all of those guys, the nature and the content of what we were working on was always confidential and remains so.
I can confirm that. And on this, because as much as I've tried to squeeze that out of Dr. George, at no point have I been able to do so. So we're close, but I've never gotten anywhere. So let me confirm that. Anybody who should happen to listen to this for years from now. Some of the old school guys, I mean, the K-Lines, the Lelands, you know, who came up school of hard knocks, you just practice, and you either have it or you don't. Did they cotton up to what the science might bring to it? That's new to them.
After a while, they did. This was interesting because, you know, when we're talking about those secrets, if you will, of those players who are able to succeed individually and on teams, there are certain characteristics that jump out. And we've looked at this. We have huge databases on this, you know, scientific stuff. But there are three things that would jump out for those who are able to sustain excellence over time. First one is what's called situational awareness. Able to see the game big, understand what their role is, what the guys next to them roles are, what the other team is trying to do to them, you know, that kind of thing. Situational awareness, 360-degree awareness, that's number one. Number two is the ability to feel the right move at the right time and not second guess what you're feeling. So that not overthinking things. I feel it, feels right, that's where I'm going to go, that's what I'm going to do. And then the third thing was no fear of failure. These guys either won or they learned, but in their minds they never lost. And those three things are, when you talk to somebody like a Jim Leland or Bill Monbouquet was one of the old timers I remember, he used to say just they're born with it. Yeah. And the idea was, no, we can teach it. You know, we can, you know, those are things that we can work with. After a while, the first thinking was, bring me those guys that have it. They're born with it or not, they have it or they don't, give me the guys that have it. And it turned out that the guys that have it are less than 1% of the players that we would have on the field. Mm-hmm. So it was never going to be possible on a team to bring in all the guys that, quote, have it. So the idea was that we needed to be able to teach it. And that's what opened up some of those eyes. And I remember Jim Leland. He would want me to be around batting practice, and then afterwards say, okay, how did I do today? You know, and it was sort of like, you're Jim Leland, you did great. But things like, you know, for example, during batting practice, our mind-body connection needs to be intact for us to be able to, you know, execute a swing, make contact with the ball, square it up, so to speak. And when we're practicing, after 4 or 5 swings, there's what's called an attenuation. So the mind-body connection goes in overdrive, and you're not learning anything anymore. So, the idea was, you know, maybe 4 or 5 swings is enough in a round of batting practice. Then you do something else. You know, you rotate through. And that was one of the things that Jim, cottoned to. He said, yeah, that makes sense. So they would have five swings. instead of 8 or 10, for example. So a little bit of science input, and if it makes sense to the guys who have been around through the years, then they would incorporate it.
They say, bring the guys to me. That's assuming that in the camp, spring training, the players are there. But prior to that, obviously, there's a draft process. There's a selection process to get them to that point. Did they employ any of your secrets of champion techniques to just sort of analyze people they may want to get?
Yes, interesting, because I did spend a lot of time with the scouting groups, and those guys. Now, for players who we had these written evaluations, on-field evaluations, and whatever, so that we could put together a compilation of what we would call their peak performance efficiency, and that was expressed as a percent. So this guy's operating at 82% efficiency. There's 18% upside. How do we get that upside out of that player? How do we bend his performance curve upward as quickly as possible? So that he knows where he is, and the organization knows where he is. So we would do that with the players who we had. But then, and I remember, getting phone calls from general manager and whatever, saying, "Look, we have a chance to trade for this guy, and they want this guy." Now, the guy who we had, we knew a lot about. But the guy who we would be trading for, we didn't know a lot about. So I remember Dave Dombrowski in particular asked me, he said, well, how do we know more about those guys? So what we developed was a way of, we called it the full measure index, that allowed us to infer from what we knew about our guys, what guys who we would watch on film were likely to give us. So that we began this process of inferential analysis of these players. And we could get pretty close. So, and we would be looking at, of course, the main things, situational awareness, things like, feel, those types of things, but also something like this, like if you see a player who is a hitter who comes into the batter's box and he's playing with his gloves on and off, boom, he's doing things like that, fooling with the dirt and all that kind of stuff. A lot of that is sort of a pre-shot routine, but it can also become obsessive. And if it looks like it's obsessive, now what that means is that this guy has a tendency to overthink a lot of things. And that could look like a hesitation in practice. So that we would take a look at everything from the time the guy is in the on-deck circle to his routine when he steps in the box, to what happens now, when he's in the box. Now, if you take, a Hall of Fame, future Hall of Famer like a Miguel Cabrera. Okay, so Miggy, of course, was absolutely amazing to be around, but when he would step into the box, he would look out there first. So in other words, he wasn't concerned about where his feet were in the box or anything like that. He wanted to see what the array of defense looked like. And he would take a glance at the pitcher, and he would make an assessment of whether or not that guy was up to the task. And all of this would happen instantaneously. And of course, we can learn from that. So when a guy comes out and steps into the box and he looks out there first, now we know that this guy is, already plotting ahead to, where he's going to hit the ball, what he's trying to do, as opposed to a guy who would be self-absorbed, worrying about this, worrying about different things. So anyway, just an example. So we developed a whole checklist along those lines.
Oh, interesting. I was just up in Buffalo Tuesday for the opener of the Blue Jays. That was electric. That was wonderful. Yeah. But one thing along those lines, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. goes up there and he always does a little kind of signature in the dirt. I have no idea what he's writing.
Yeah.
I haven't read that far, but he's always da-da-da-da,
Yeah.
and then kind of looks around, looks at the players and or the other team, and
Yeah.
and then swings at the first pitch and gets a
Yeah.
you know. It's a,
But that's the kind of thing, like that little thing he does in the dirt, that could just be part of his, he's connecting with his dad or something like that. That's absolutely normal. Some guys make the sign of the cross, a lot of the Latino players, and that's okay. But when it gets to a point where it looks like it's, I better do this or I don't have a chance, type of thing, then we take question about that.
how often did your role go from providing secrets of champions to really being emotionally counseling somebody? I mean, there's a deep mental aspect of it. I don't know if I can play this game. I don't know. So you go from fine-tuning a skill set to all of a sudden, I don't know if I can make it.
Well, in the Tigers organization, and also, in some of the other organizations that I've had the privilege of working with, there's always, like a sports psychology guy.
Right.
And in our case with the Tigers, it was Brian Peterson. And Petey and I worked hand in hand with every player. I handled the on-the-field stuff. He handled the off-the-field stuff. So that was one demarcation. So if we had some concern about, domestic situation, substances, things like that, Petey handled all of that stuff. I was, focused on what happened between the lines, so to speak. Now, when you look at the confidence element that you're talking about, we would always be right up front with the players and say, look, everybody is not going to be able to make it to the big leagues. And the best thing that we can do is help you get to be your best as soon as possible, so and the organization knows where you stand. So we want to make informed judgments, and that has to be based on data. It has to be based on information that is real. So in our interactions with players, we were always right up front. You're now operating at 92% efficiency. This means that you're using your tools about as good as you can use them, and you're here in AA, and that may be it. And sometimes that's a hard discussion to have, especially when their aspirations or whatever. But we would always try, if we're working with players for 3-4 years, you have a relationship. And it's sort of like, Doc, it's time for me to, look into being an insurance man, isn't it? And, well, maybe it is. But the key is developing the trust over time. And that's another one of the things that is sort of a characteristic of an organization and a team that really is able to succeed year in and year out. The hierarchy of relationship construction. Trust is the most important thing. Number one is trust. And that means that I trust that you'll have my back and I'll have your back. And it has to come from management as well, not just the players next to you, but from your coaches and from the administration. So trust is the most important thing. The second most important thing is team. So that we are in this together, the idea of we. And when you have trust as the first priority and team as the second, talent then reveals. And that's where those glue guys come in. A guy like Dustin Pedroia, a guy like Brandon Inge. Those are glue guys. There were stars around them. The stars do what they do. But if you're going to be a championship team, you got to have those glue guys. And the only way to get that is to make sure that there's trust, it's a team, and then talent will reveal.
We talked principally about baseball and your experiences there. Is it Secrets of Champions easily portable to other, could be football, hockey, basketball? I know you really had relationships with all of those.
Yeah, it's transportable in terms of the players, their mind-body connection, the team concepts. That's transportable. Like I was for a year with the Buffalo Bills on Rex Ryan's staff, and that was really interesting because it started from the top. Rex was a big proponent of what we were trying to do with the Secrets of Champions with the Bills. But there are also other things, like for example, one of the guys I spent a lot of time working with was Lorenzo Alexander, and he was just a super guy. He had been a defensive end, and then he became a linebacker, sort of had a rebirth, second career. And one of the things that he was always interested in was the time zone differences. How do I adjust when we travel to the West Coast and we're based here in the East Coast? So there's a 3-hour time difference. How does that impact my energy cycles? How does that impact the timing of my nutrition? Those are pretty sophisticated questions. It wasn't just, let's, bam, bam stuff. So I've found over the years that whether you're talking about a football player, a baseball player, or a basketball player, or a soccer player, or a hockey player, whatever, those guys are smart, and they dig in. And if you can develop the trust relationship, they're going to allow you in, and they're going to ask you questions that really matter. And like I said, I've been impressed with the knowledge base and the sincerity and the seriousness with which these guys go about their business.
Is Secrets of Champions is something that's been developed by you?
Yes.
Was there an aha moment where you decided to that there is something scientific about this process, this performance, that you in fact can make it available? Was there something in your prior life, your medical career, where this?
Yeah, there were a couple of those. One of the things that I was privileged to do was work when the military Joint Special Operations Command was first put in place. And I was brought in with a bunch of other guys to look at this mind-body connection stuff. And prior to that...
By the way, I should probably get your CV. You went to college where?
I did a bunch of stuff at UB.
Okay,
UB, and then I finished up a lot of the medical stuff at the Uniformed Services University for the Health Sciences. I went to law school at George Washington University. So, sort of interesting. You'll appreciate this being from Jamestown. I'm Italian, and some of the people in my family came from Italy, and so my grandmother, who was very, very straight with everything, all she ever heard was Georgie was in college, and of course she didn't realize that there were different degrees and different things you're going after. So one day she said to me, she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm in college. I'm learning law." She said, "You're still in college?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, you know what? If you're not getting it, you should try something else." This has been going on for too long. Anyway, so in the course, so historically, a lot of times, in the epidemiology field, which is part of what I do, you're looking at what goes wrong when people smoke too much, for example, drink too much, the things that go wrong pathologically. And I was always interested in, well, what goes right when people do those things that should be harmful and they're not harmful? Mm-hmm. Like, back in the day when people used to smoke a lot, everybody who smoked didn't get lung cancer. And in fact, there are a lot of people who smoked didn't get sick at all. And so that was sort of intriguing. What was the difference there? And when we started looking at mind-body connection stuff with special operations soldiers and things like that, it became really interesting that the mind-body connection was driven by the autonomic nervous system, that nervous system that you didn't need to think about, is the automatic nervous system, if you will. And there are two components to that. One of them is called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the feel nervous system, the anticipation nervous system. And the other one is the sympathetic nervous system, which is the survival nervous system. And we started looking at this, and the first aha moment was, the parasympathetic nervous system is the trying to win nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is the trying not to lose nervous system. And I wonder if there's a relationship in terms of how those two relate to each other in a performer, whether it's a soldier or an athlete or whatever. And it turned out that we were able to accumulate data over about 15 years. And we had a database of about 25,000 people in this database. And we were able to look at this relationship between parasympathetic and sympathetic functioning. And it turned out that in those who were able to sustain excellence over time, and we define that as in the top 5% of what they were doing for 5 years, the ratio of parasympathetic to sympathetic dominance was about 80-20. 80% parasympathetic, 20% sympathetic. Translating that into sports, it's 80% trying to win, 20% trying not to lose. So 80% on offense, 20% on defense, however you want to do that. And it turned out that there were triggers that were available to help engage parasympathetic functioning and to suppress sympathetic functioning. Because what would happen is if the sympathetic nervous system was too dominant, there would be a release of adrenaline. And when adrenaline is released, what happens is the mind-body connection is severed. The other thing that happens is that blood flow in your peripheral, your hands, feet, legs, those kinds of things, is reduced in favor of more blood flow to your core. Now, that's a physiologic thing that's part of survival, it's part of fight or flight. But from a performing athlete, when blood flow to your fingers and hands is reduced, you lose feel. So if you lose feel and you're a pitcher, your spin rate goes down. You don't have as much movement on the ball. So those were some of the things that we looked at and said, wow, there are ways for us to actually trigger parasympathetic dominance to get more toward that optimal ratio. So that was one of the aha moments. It was that there was a neurobiological basis for performance. And then when we started to talk about this with whether it was somebody in the military or somebody in sports or coaches and players, it made sense. Because they sort of had this sense that this guy who was performing at a very, very high level seemed to have those characteristics that, well, he was always trying to beat the other team. He didn't really care about whether or not he got a hit. In other words, there are these little things that would ring a bell for a player. And then what we would be able to do is translate that into the neurobiology. And then, after a period of time, we said, okay, how can we assess where a player is with regard to this continuum?
So you have this aha moment, and then you got to field test it. I mean, this is great on theory, this is great data. At some point, you got to walk on the field, grab the athletes, and try to put it into action to see if it is real. Was that a tough thing to translate to, the field test?
Well, it was interesting because there was sort of a sequence that we went through, beginning in the 90s. The first place we tried this in the field was with George Washington University's men's basketball and then women's basketball programs. And it was interesting because on those teams, there were players from the former Soviet Union, from Belarus. And it was interesting because those guys were way ahead of us in some of this. They already had this figured out. So some of this parasympathetic functioning stuff, they had been taught in the academies that they were going into at 14 years old. So that was a validation. And of course, you remember back in the day, Soviets used to win the Olympics every year. So these guys had something. So that was the first place with the George Washington University basketball. And then we had an interesting opportunity with the Golden Bear Golf Tour. And the way this came about was there was an agent who I met who represented a few players who were on this under tour that was run by Jack Nicklaus, and he said, we'd like to get you involved in this, but you got to meet Jack. And I was like, oh boy, Jack Nicklaus, So got a chance to go to Florida, sit down with him, another one of these human beings that are just off the chart great. And we had some discussions, and one thing sort of stands out is we were watching a tournament and I was riding in the cart with him, and so I said to him, I said, Jack, I said, when you have a bad round back in your day, how would you recover for that? How would you come back? He looked at me like I had two heads. He said, I've never had a bad round. I've never had a bad putt, and I was interested, of course. We talked a little bit more about it, but the thing was, it was the mindset. Yeah. Always a winner, no fear of failure. Yeah. And that was pretty cool. So anyway, so we were on the Golden Bear Tour for a couple of years. The name of the entity at the time was called Golf Life Institute. And we had a couple of RVs that we had outfitted, and we were doing, blood tests and urine tests and whatever in these RVs, players on tour. We then developed a relationship with several players on the PGA Tour. So, had a chance to work with some of those guys. So then what happened was sort of interesting. We had these two vans, these two RVs that were big, and we needed to have a place to park them while we were back in Washington, because we were working out of Washington. And of course, Dan Lynette at the time was, he had been with the Expos, and I think this was 2003, 2004, in that time frame. And so, he agreed to help us park them. So we found a place over near where he lived in Melbourne, Florida. And then we got Dan involved in this. And so he would, come. I remember he drove one of the vans up to Ponte Vedra, and we sat with Fred Funk for an afternoon, and Dan was with us. We did our Secrets to Champion stuff on golf, which it's different than with baseball, but it has to do with same principles. And what ended up happening was Dan got to become familiar with this, and so when he then signed with the Tigers, it was Dan who called me and said, we have a couple of players here who, they're pitchers and they have the thing, and that stuff that you did with golfers, does it apply to these baseball guys? And I said, probably does. So that's how we began the relationship with the Tigers. Dan called me in, it was spring training, and had these guys to work with. One of the pitching coaches at the time was Bill Montbouquet, and he thought this stuff was nuts. But I, as a consultant, we did a few things, and then I had met Dave Dombrowski at Dan's wedding when they were both with the Marlins, and then so after a couple of weeks of doing this, I had a meeting with Dave, and he said, I think we should bring you in and work with some other players. So that's how it started. So we went from basketball to golf to Dan Lynette, and then to baseball. And then, we continued the field testing, all through the next 15, 18 years.
Here we are today, 2021. We just had our first Tarp Skunk game last night in Newark, and won, good for the camera. So we're still undefeated. And you're anticipating meeting with the guys as early as this Thursday prior to the home opener. What is it that they are expecting, and what is it you expect to kind of accomplish during this year?
Well, I think that the first thing is to develop a level of trust, These are 30-some players who have come from different places across the country. They know some of the Secrets of Champions by reputation. Jordan always speaks highly of what we do, so they have an idea. But the first thing is to explain to them what it is, and the most important element is that it's science-based. This is not just, we're not guessing here. We've been developing this for 35 years. It's science, and it's going to give you an edge that you can take with you. Our job here is to get you ready for that next step, for that next level. And we want this to be something that you can carry with you the rest of your career, so that this is, it's player development oriented. We're here for you. And then as we go through the season with these guys over the next couple of months, there are going to be some things that we can, work on, fine-tuning individual players a certain way, and they'll be able to take that with them. So we're here to service the players. We're here for them. And once we convey that, day in and day out, I think it all comes together.
Well, we anticipate a very unique year this year, our first. And George, you were right. You're at day one of the Tarp Skunks.
Well, this is an honor. Are you kidding me? To be back in Jamestown is part of this. From being a bat boy. I mean, it's awesome. Doesn't get any better.
You'll be back on the field in a uniform.
That's right.
Thank you, George.
Sure.